Hi, this is Mystical Storms here with fanfiction called Midoriya Izuku Origin, written by Anonymous. This fanfiction was not rated, and I hope you enjoy. So let's get started. The sky was clear and almost a reflection of the blinking city lights below. On the evening Izuku took his first step into a world he knew frighteningly little about. Cars honk and the faint noise of a faraway battle rang through the chilly air as he walked aimlessly through a familiar maze of streets, a habit he had developed during middle school. It wasn't the smartest hobby, if you could even call it that, with the danger of encountering a villain always looming over his shoulder, but simple walks in the dark always help clear his head, especially on a day like this. Izuku sighed and pressed his jet black school jacket closer to his body. Without power can one become a hero? All Might's voice echoed for probably 100 times through his head, like the beat of a drum. No, I should think not. You need to be realistic, kid. The bitter wave of disappointment that crashed over him did nothing but make him feel even more pathetic. Of course he couldn't become a hero. He was almost impressed of how he was able to delude himself into hoping All Might say something different, how he kept a little shimmer of hope alive, that the hero would encourage him, that someone would finally believe that he could actually do it. Instead, the hero had cut the safety line. He had clung for the first 10 years like a victim who was about to drown, and let him sink to the bottom of the ocean. He clutched his notebook so tightly his knuckles became white and kicked a pebble. It was probably better this way, he tried to convince himself. Giving up on his dream of becoming a hero meant he could concentrate on a job he could actually pursue. Maybe a police officer or a medic or whatever. Needing to be realistic, All Might said. Realistic. God, he started to hate this word. Realistically, he was quirkless. Realistically, he would die the second he got into a fight as a hero. Realistically, he would be useless and do more harm than good. His eyes stung, and he washed away the tears with his sleeve of his jacket. Heaven knows he already cried enough for one day. He pulled out his phone to distract himself. The fluorescent light flooded his face in a blue shine, and a message from his mom popped up on the screen. Are you okay? It's getting late. Please send me a message to let me know you're okay. Smiley face emoji. A short look at the little white 2100 at the top made him wince. Great, he muttered. He hadn't even noticed how long he's been walking around town. Quickly, he wrote his mom that he'd get back soon and shut off his phone. With one last long sigh, he turned around to return home, but before he could even take one further step, a loud crack and terrifying scream pierced through the night. He froze. His blood pumped through his veins and his body tensed as he waited for another sound, to no avail. The only thing he could hear was his own heartbeat, going faster and faster inside his chest. But the rest of the world remained silent, almost unnaturally so. It sounded like the scream came from one of the narrow alleys which covered the city like a spiderweb. Most shops were already closed, so they were left dark and deserted, perfect for an ambush. Izuku hesitated. He should run away. He knew that. That was the only logical thing to do right now. Run away and call the police or the hero agencies so that they can deal with whatever is happening here. But it sounded like someone was in trouble. And what if the heroes would arrive too late? It was as if someone electrocuted him. Most heroes depending on depending on their quirk, would arrive between 2 and 20 minutes. Of course, there was exceptions like Hawks, All Might, and Endeavor, but there was no high-ranking hero agencies anywhere near this place. The nearest agency, the one that led by Dead Arms, was at least 20 kilometers away, if there was even a slight chance he could be of help. A pearl of sweat ran down his forehead, and images started to fill his head as if he was watching a movie at 10 times speed. Someone lying unconscious on the ground, dark blood pouring from their wounds, another person dressed in dark clothes leaning over them, lips twisted into a cruel smile, and bloody knife or gun in their hands. He inhaled sharply, eyes wide as saucers as he stared into the darkness. Then Izuku ran into the alley. The street lights were broken, and the farther he ran, the darker it got. Plastic bottles and other pieces of garbage covered the ground. He almost split on the empty candy package, but somehow he managed to keep his balance. So far, he didn't see anything suspicious, but as his chest started to hurt, he thought about stopping and calling the police, just in case. The hair on his arm and neck stood up. A blinding light, the smell of ozone, and then a body flew past him. Shortly blinded, he closed his eyes, stumbled a few steps back until his back touched a wall. He blinked. The body of a man, as he could see after daring to look again, landed next to a trash bag with a loud thump. Two flares grew out of his bald head, and his now unmoving body was dressed completely in black. A dark mask covered half of his face, and his eyes hovered back inside his head. He looked from where he was thrown and saw a figure quickly approaching, a figure he recognized countless local newspapers. Izuku's mouth fell open. The hero wore a yellow scarf over a black leather jacket and a signature dark motorcycle helmet with neon strips. Bits of light ran over both of his arms and provided the only light in the alley, reflecting from the house surrounding it. He must have used lightning slash, Izuku thought, an attack which he loaded up a bunch of energy inside his body, turned it into electricity, and released it, fast and effective. Its only weakness was that he was left exhausted and needed food to regain strength. Izuku looked shocked, Izuku shook his head to snap himself out of his thoughts. "Gold lightning?" he asked between breaths, his voice octave higher than usually. The hero turned his head towards him. "A teenager?" It came out muffled from his helmet. He could still hear the man's surprise. His ears became red. "Sorry," he mumbled. "I just heard a noise and thought I should check it out. I didn't mean to bother you." His speech became quieter. He started to fiddle with his notebook. "I probably should have just called the police, but I wasn't sure, and I didn't want to waste their time, so..." He stopped himself, his face now burning. "Sorry," he repeated. Don't apologize." Lightning sounded tired. But it's late. You should return home." He glanced at him, at least. Izuku thought he glanced at him. It was hard to tell with the helmet, and gestured to the man on the ground. "You okay with going home alone? I need to get this guy to the police." "Yeah, absolutely," he nodded, maybe a bit too enthusiastically. "Don't worry about me." "What about you?" The hero turned around. Only then did Izuku notice the woman leaning against the wall and holding her right ankle behind him. 2 brown locks fell down her shaking shoulders. Her face has gone pale. She waved him off with a weak shake of her hand. "I'll be fine, thank you, Lightning." Her voice was barely above a whisper, strained with pain, but the hero didn't seem to notice, just nodded. "No problem." He bowed down to pick up the villain with an arm that shook from exhaustion. Izuku took a step forward. "Wait." He opened the backpack and searched for a few seconds before his hands closed around an energy bar he always hid in the front. With a nervous grin, he held it out to the hero. You need food to replenish your power, right? He looked at the ground. It isn't much, but I figure energy bar is better than nothing. It's alright if you don't want it, though. Thanks. Lightning sounded relieved. He took the bar and Izuku thought he might have smiled under his helmet. I seriously have to remember to keep stock of food with me, or at least money. He shrugged. Well, note for next time. Get back home safe, kid. You too, ma'am. Lightning picked up the villain, opened the energy bar, and with another blast of lightning, Izuku and the women were left alone in the alley. Without the hero's light, it became dark again, so dark that the woman was now only a black silhouette 3 meters away from him. Awkward silence replaced the rippling sound of lightning and electricity. The woman had sunk to the floor and let out a long, shuddering breath. Are you all right? He found himself asking softly. The woman nodded. Yeah, I'm okay. Just shock, you know. The man attacked you, tried to rob me. She sighed. Luckily, Gold Lightning noticed me before anything could happen, and well, he saw the rest. How about you? Izuku frowned. What do you mean? She let out a snort. What kind of kid runs into a dark alley after hearing a scream? Blood rushed to his face. A stupid kid, I guess, he muttered. He really had no clue what he had been thinking. It's not like he could have stopped the criminal. She sounded amused. I'd call it reckless, not stupid. I'm Shiyazaki. By the way, Shiyazaki Kimura. Izuku Midoriya, he replied, and sent her a weak smile, even though she couldn't see it. I would say it's nice to meet you, but that would sound wrong regarding the situation. I suppose so, Shiyazaki said. She took one last deep breath and tried to stand up, which seemed to cost her an incredible amount of strength. If her pain expression was anything to go by, her leg buckled and Izuku rushed forward. Shit, Shiyazaki hissed. But before he could hit the ground, Izuku managed to grab her hand and pull her up. She leaned against the wall. As soon as she was secure, Izuku let go of her, as if she was on fire. Sorry, you probably don't want another random guy to rush to your side. After almost getting robbed in the alley, I shouldn't have grabbed your hand like that. I'm so sorry. I didn't think. Don't apologize, she said. Thank you for catching me. Shiyazaki grimaced at her foot. But that's going to be a problem. You're hurt, he stated, unhelpfully. I guess so. She sounded frustrated before shaking her head. The guy got me once and knocked me to the floor, but it's not like I had a choice. I need to go to get home. Yeah, Izuku sighed and let his eyes wander over to the alley and let them linger over what looked like a metal pole which lay discarded on the ground. He picked it up. That was his weapon. Shiyazaki explained. Lightning knocked it out of his hands with the last attack. Do you think you can use it as a crutch? As a crutch? Izuku asked. It looks like it's long enough. Maybe. Shiyazaki looked doubtful, but she took it anyway. Better nothing, I guess. Thanks, Izuku. Carefully, she started to test it out. Her face was still crunched in pain, as she was slow, but she managed to walk a few feet without too much difficulty. Good, she muttered, sent him a grin. Guess I'm good to go. Izuku studied her. Now that they stood closer together, Shiyazaki was still pale. Sweat covered her forehead, her lip was quirked up, but it didn't reach her slightly widened eyes, and her hands were shivering. Is your apartment far away? He asked, lacing in a stone. Not at all, she said. It's around 2 kilometers east. What about you? Northeast, he replied. Maybe 4 kilometers. Would you? He stopped himself. They didn't know each other, and he was 14. No way it wouldn't be weird for him to ask if he could accompany her. But if she was in pain after only a few steps, he sighed and glanced at her. Would it be okay for you if I accompanied you until you're home? I mean, you're hurt and it's dark, and if anything happens to you. He trails and stared at the ground. His face was not completely red. Sorry, you probably don't want to. Just, it looks like your ankle could be seriously injured. He winced. Yeah, that's not weird coming from a stranger. I like that, Shiyazaki said, and he looked up surprised, relieved. The relief had transformed her face into a smile, and Izuku realized that she probably didn't want to be out alone at night after encountering with the villain. He grinned. Great. The walk at first remained uneventful and quiet. Neither of them said anything, but it wasn't as awkward as it had been in the alley. The air was fresh and cool, but not freezing, thanks to Airstream, a relatively new vigilante that had her debut around 2 years ago, and they enjoyed clear air, even in a city as dense populated as Musutafu, which made her instantly one of the most popular vigilantes out there. Even law enforcement had blind eye when it came to her. Izuku really wanted to ask her more about her quirk, or what kind of effects its heavy use had on her when he really thought about it. I really love seeing the stars like this, Shiyazaki said. He smiled at the sky where millions of blinking lights shone down on them. Never imagined to be able to see them like this from my apartment. Already sent Airstream a thank you note, though I wish I could do more. Yeah, me too, Izuku grinned. I wonder how powerful Airway is to keep this up for 2 years, because she's a vigilante. She is very secretive about her quirk, so there's just a couple of theories about her online. I personally believe that has some kind of advantage, photosynthesis, which allows her to turn carbon somehow into oxygen. That could be cool. The longer he talked, the faster he became a habit he had given up on getting rid of a long time ago. But obviously that would mean she could only do it with enough sunlight and water, which I honestly doubt. She probably also doesn't get any personal energy from it, because otherwise she would get way too energized from such a powerful quirk. Well, maybe that would be possible if she constantly works out while using it, but that would be hard to keep up every day. She must have trained extremely hard to use it on such a large scale, but even then, I think she might work together with another vigilante with a power support quirk, or maybe even several. He tilted his head. Probably several. I don't think anyone could use a quirk as strong as hers so frequently otherwise. Shiyazaki chuckled, and he started to blush. Sorry, I tend to ramble a lot when it comes to quirks. It's annoying, I know. It's fine, more interesting than annoying, she said. I think having such an interesting analyzing quirks. I think having such an interest in analyzing quirks is pretty awesome. Do you want to become a hero one day? Izuku froze in his steps. Do I? Before he could finish his sentence, the door of a shop in front of them flew open and a man jumped out. He looked triumphant. A wildfire burned in his red eyes as he took off the black mask he had worn and deeply inhaled the chilly air. His blonde hair danced in the wind. In his hands he held a backpack where a few yen fluttered out. Shiyazaki took a step back and Izuku's eyes widened. Seriously, she muttered. Again. That wasn't the right thing to do. Criminal's eyes switched to him, and with that realizing, he touched his now exposed skin. Then his face transformed into a scowl. I didn't plan on running into anyone else today. His raspy voice sounded more inconvenienced than panicked. But I'm not going to leave any witnesses. I am not going back to jail. He raised his arms. The implication of those words reached Izuku almost too late. The villain's eyes began to glow like charcoal, and with a complicated hand moved he sent a wall of blazing off fire towards them. Izuku jumped to the side, sending Shiyazaki together with him tumbling to the ground, where she let out a painful yelp. "Sorry," he muttered. As he stood up and took a few steps back, his heart was racing, his breath came out panicked. There had to be another hero around, right? Lightning was still in the area, so if he could just buy some time. Quickly, he dared to look around them and cursed. No lights burned in the city, and no other civilians were in line of sight. They were alone. Izuku's mouth became dry. Damn it, Shiyazaki crawled backwards away from the villain. Her voice sounded afraid. "Shit." Flames danced over the villain's fingertips, illuminating his furious face in an orange light. A large scar covered his face from his left eyebrow to his cheek, making him look almost diabolical. Creation and probably control of fire. An emitter. Quirk, no doubt about it. Similar to his hand tied around his notebook, and cold shudder went over his back, similar to Endeavor page 4. Never. Second highest ranked hero. His mind supplied almost automatically. Quirk Hellfire. That allowed him to produce high temperature flames, hot enough to melt even the strongest metal. Hard training over several years, intense study cultivating into short and long range attacks like flash fire fist and prominence burn. He gulped. Fire quirks were almost always chaotic in nature. If the guy's quirk was anything close to Endeavor's level, Izuku cursed silently, and a single pearl sweat ran down his forehead. Not even if he wasn't. Fire quirks were versatile. Their only weakness was the owner could burn himself by overextension. The best way to fight against in a battle of perseverance, but for that you'd have to be able to hold your own against the owner of the quirk for a while. He glanced back to Shiyazaki, who still held her foot and stared at the villain, face almost as pale as if freshly fallen snow, and dark eyes white in fear. Yeah, they could be toast way before that would happen. With ever-growing panic, he looked back to the villain. He hadn't moved from his spot and continued to glare at the two of them. Izuku's eyebrows drew together. That was at least a bit odd. If he was being honest, what kind of villain hesitate to finish off the defenseless middle schooler and an injured woman in her early 20s, especially during a time where a hero could show up any minute? People with strong quirks tended to finish the job as quickly as possible. That's what Endeavor normally did. That's what Kachan would do. Maybe if they were lucky, he forced himself to take a deep breath, calm down, analyze the situation. He scalped himself. Don't assume stuff about him just because of his quirk. He looked back at the villain. The criminal's eyes quickly twitched from one side of the street to the other. His stance was stiff, and smoke started to rise from his arms. Izuku's eyes widened in realization. He may have overextended his quirk already, but the robbery of the shop was close to reaching his limit. Maybe the firewall was too much already. Running into him is Shiyazaki, or anyone for that matter, hadn't been part of his plan. On top of that, his hand movement required time. He realized so much time at least that he, admittedly unfit, inexperienced, afraid 14-year-old would be able to evade him. My quirk might be effective with enough distance, the word of his father's rang through his head from when he was younger, but believe me, Izuku, I get a lot of issues should I be involved in a close combat. It was a long shot, he had to admit, but if he could somehow get close enough. Stay back, he muttered. So quietly, Shiyazaki was the only one able to hear him before he was able to overthink his action. What? Have you lost your mind? Her voice shook and came out barely a whisper. Somehow it helped grounding him. He grabbed the metal pole she had dropped on the ground and stepped in front of her. Stay back, he repeated louder this time. The villain seized him up, his lips transforming into what he probably planned to be a confident smirk, but apprehensive grew in his eyes. Looks like Izuku wasn't completely wrong then. That gave him at least a bit of confidence. Don't be stupid, boy, that fake smirk widened. You've got no shot here. Probably not, he thought, but his hands tightened around the pole and his stance became steadier as he took a step forward. I'm not letting you hurt her. He himself was surprised by the determination in his tone, but he could bring himself to regret it. Maybe he would become a hero, but that didn't mean he couldn't do anything in his powers to protect them both. Izuku, he's right. Shiyazaki sounded desperate. Run away. Not while you're still here. He took a deep breath. Just leave it to me. Before he could think how crazy he was, he rushed forward. The villain quickly got over his initial surprise and moved his hands up again. Izuku watched, moving closely. If it was the same one as before, he could avoid him at exactly the right moment. And the hand moved down, and then the left, and then his pinky and thumb moved to touch. Just before he could, Izuku jumped to the right and then kept running, while another fireball moved to where he just stood. The heat was almost unbearable, and sweat dropped down his body. He didn't get hurt. His opponent scowled. His scowl deepened. He moved his hand towards as if to pray. Didn't want to use this, he growled. But it'll finish off the brat. Izuku's heart beat so fast, it might as well explode his stomach. His stomach felt rock hard, but he continued to run towards the villain. Izuku's heart beat so fast that it might as well explode. At this point, he doubted he could even make the mistake himself. Physically stopped. He'd be okay. As long as he could see him, he tried to calm himself down, found comfort in cool metal of pole. He'd be fine. The villain showed him both of his palms, which started to glow orange. A new attack. Right as that glow materialized in a flame, he jumped to the left and again dodged the fire. Hope started to flatter in his chest. He was now around 2 meters away from the villain. Maybe only one more attack, then everything went wrong. Instead of the fireball disappearing like the last two, he had followed the villain's hand straight towards Izuku. There wasn't any time to react before it engulfed him. He felt as if hot lava was poured over his head, and he fell to the ground screaming in pain. The villain was laughing loud, wild, cruel laughter that echoed through the empty streets, while Izuku's tears started to form in the corners of his eyes. He lowered the pole, pressed his arm around his chest from some sort of comfort. Black dots began to dance in the corner of his eyes. Had to force himself to stay awake. Shit, he hissed. He was about to close his eyes in pain when he halted. He stared at his arms, his unburned, pretty much immaculate arms surrounded by orange-red flames. Even the little dark hairs weren't burned. The only thing that seemed off was a weird purplish glow that covered his body. The flames hurt, by heavens they hurt. Cautions and explosions were nothing against whatever this was, but they seemed to have no effect on him. He blinked and looked closer at the glow. It looked almost like a shield, similar to the quirk of a shield hero protector. His eyes widened, glancing back to Shiyazaki. He couldn't make her out beyond the fire that still burned around him, but he believed that to see the purple orb in the distance, which might have been her eyes. The villain was still laughing, probably thinking Izuku was currently burning alive. New determination rushed through his body and gritted his teeth. His hold around the pole tightened with the sharp bread, and he fought through the pain, stood up again on shaking legs. He knew only one more shot of the Shiyazaki's quirk could give in at any moment, or the villain could take note of its existence. Izuku bit his lip and rushed toward the flames, like tingling on his skin, and his eyes watered, but he didn't dare stopping. The distorted figure of the villain quickly got closer. He had stopped laughing and lowered his arms, finally noticing that something was wrong, but it was too late. Fire vanished and the villain's stunned face became visible, and Izuku struck his head with the pole. With a bone-breaking crash, blood spread from the villain's nose and his eyes rolled back into his head. He crumpled unconscious to the ground. It was over. Izuku let go of his weapon, which cluttered on the street. His panted breath and the sound of his blood rushing through his veins filled his ears, and he let himself sink to the floor. He felt numb. They were still alive. Heavens, they were still alive. Closing his eyes, Izuku took a deep breath and wiped away the sweat on his forehead with a shivering hand. Holy shit, Shiyazaki, shaking voice brought him back to reality. She hadn't moved from her spot and ran a hand through her hair. Thought you were dead. Twice in one night has to be a record, right? Probably, he agreed and managed to stand up, shaking legs. Well, I'll definitely be burnt to a crisp without you, thank you. He handed her the pole. It's a pretty awesome quirk. Not really, she shook her head. You can only protect one person at a time, only for like 5 seconds, and still feel the pain. And don't thank me. Shiyazaki stared at the pole in her hands, but didn't even try to stand up. Why? I pretty much appreciate you know, not being dead. Kid. She sounded exasperated. You just beat a villain unconscious who was about to kill us. If anything, I owe you. Anyone would have done that. He sat down on the ground next to her side. And we should probably call the police. This guy should be arrested. Definitely. They looked at each other. I just ran through fire, Izuku said as the realization dawned on him. I just ran through a wall of fire. Shiyazaki's lips quirked up. Do you want me to call them? Yes, please, he said, ran a hand over his face. I can't believe I just did that, he muttered. Well, Shiyazaki pulled out her phone and started dial. That was the coolest thing I ever did in my life. Oh God, I almost just died. Shiyazaki let out a snort, but he ignored her. He closed his eyes as she talked to the police, then she turned her phone off, and they sat on the ground in silence. That was pretty brave, Shiyazaki said softly after a few seconds. If you ask me, you should seriously think about becoming a hero if you want to, that is. Izuku chuckled bitterly. Thank you, but I doubt it's possible. Why not? She asked. She looked at him. You're brave from what I can tell, and you're pretty quick thinker, and you like analyzing quirks. I dare say we'd be lucky to have you. I'm quirkless. The words tasted like ash in his mouth, but by now he had said it so often he had gotten used to it. Ever heard of a quirkless hero? Shiyazaki was stunned. He felt her staring at him, crush himself to bring it up. Izuku forced a tired smile on his face. But I think I'm going to be alright. I could be a police officer or whatever. I'll probably be fine, just, The silence became almost deafening, and he braced himself for laughter or insults. His schoolmates' faces flashed through his mind, laughing, their eyes filled with glee or disgust as they looked at him scribbling in his notebook, whispering behind his back, or hell, even in front of his face, about the useless, quirkless kid who still clung to his hopeless dream and spend his life researching heroes. Not yet. Her voice sounded different from before, calm, soft, and serious. Huh? He stared at her like she'd grown a second head. She raised an eyebrow when their eyes met. I haven't met a quirkless hero so far, she admitted, but you managed to beat that guy without one. She gestured to the men on the ground. That was pretty heroic, if you ask me. Only because you were there. He disagreed. Your quirk protected me. Then get yourself some sport gear, armor, or a suit, or something like that. She shrugged. I have to admit, I personally don't know too much about what it takes to become a pro hero. But today, you saved my life, and you seem passionate about it, so I think you should go for it if you want to. She nudged his shoulder. Would be a shame if Japan would miss out on a great hero just because he didn't believe in himself. Oh, he didn't know how to respond to that. That was new. He swallowed as his eyes began to sting and the police sirens got louder. A few seconds later, 2 cars drove into the street. They watched quietly as they halted. They're going to drive us home, Shiyazaki said. 3 officers stepped onto the street and I asked them to. Good, thanks. Izuku helped her stand up and gave her the pull cautiously. Do you really think that? Think what? Her eyebrows drew together. That'd make a great hero? Her eyes. He eyed her wearily. No. No one. You'd be the first to think so. She studied his face with a seriousness that made him uncomfortable. He looked at the ground. Can I ask you something? She finally said. Sure, he muttered. What went through your head when you stepped in front of me because you said you're not going to let him hurt me? I wanted to keep you safe, I suppose. He sighed. To be honest, I didn't really think about it a lot. She let out a laugh, but it didn't sound condescending. It sounded clear and free, and it reminded Izuku of wind chimes. Run to save someone without caring about your own safety, she smiled at him, and he was sure he would never forget her face in that moment. There wasn't any pity or disgust or even amusement, only certainty, and for the first time in Izuku's life since he had found out that he was quirkless, he felt a faint flicker of flutter inside his chest. That sounded exactly like what a hero would say. Thank you for listening to this fanfiction. This is my first podfic. Well, technically not my first, but my first in 3 years. I am open to any criticism. The link to the fanfic will be in the description, and yeah, I hope it wasn't too hard to understand. I can talk quite fast sometimes, and I have issues understanding words. Well, not understanding, but reading words properly. And I also have issues of reading, so it can be hard. So I just hope it was good enough and that you guys enjoyed. Thank you, and have a good day or night. Don't forget to stay hydrated, lovelies.